Picture this. You're driving down a dirt road in British Columbia, past what looks like an ordinary pig farm, the kind of place where you might stop to buy some bacon directly from the source. But beneath the mundane exterior of this seemingly innocent farmstead lurked one of Canada's most horrifying secrets, a secret that would eventually expose the darkest corners of human depravity and systemic failure. This is the story of Robert Pickton, and trust me, it's going to get very weird indeed. In the vast landscape of human criminality, some cases require extraordinary investigation to uncover their full scope. This represents one of those investigations, where decades of missed signals and ignored evidence created the perfect conditions for unprecedented horror. What makes this case so profound isn't just the scale of the crimes, but what it reveals about our fundamental assumptions regarding whose lives matter. The cosmic soundtrack of justice was playing. We just weren't listening to the right frequencies. Robert Pickton was born on October 24th, 1949, to Leonard Francis Pickton and Louise Helene Arnold, a family of pig farmers in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, 27 kilometers east of Vancouver. Now, growing up on a pig farm might sound idyllic to some, but for young Robert, it was anything but ordinary. His childhood was a masterclass in dysfunction, wrapped in farm-fresh packaging. His father wasn't involved in raising him and his brother Dave. That responsibility fell solely on their mother, Louise. Louise was described as a workaholic, eccentric, and tough. She made the boys work long hours on the farm, even on school days, which meant that they often stank. So imagine being the kid at school who always smelled like pig manure and dead animals. Social success wasn't exactly in the cards for Robert. Here's where things get properly unsettling. There were even reports that Pickton would hide in pig carcasses as a kid when he wanted to avoid someone. Yes, you heard right, he hid inside dead pig bodies. If that doesn't set off every alarm bell in your head about this person's future trajectory, I don't know what would. After dropping out of school, he left a butcher's apprenticeship to begin working full-time at his family's pig farm and inherited it in the early 1990s. So we have a man with minimal education, severe social difficulties, and an intimate familiarity with butchering and disposal of animal remains. What could possibly go wrong? Before we get into it, please like this video and subscribe. Let's break the YouTube algorithm together. Alright then, back to it. Here's the thing that makes this story so bizarre. Robert Pickton wasn't just some isolated farm hermit. Pickton became wealthy by selling parts of his farmland to property developers as the economy of the Lower Mainland grew exponentially in the 1980s to 1990s. The man was actually quite successful financially. With his newfound wealth, he decided to branch out into the entertainment business. Now, if you thought hosting dinner parties was stressful, imagine converting your pig farm's slaughterhouse into a nightclub. That's exactly what Robert Pickton did. In 1996, they also founded a non-profit charity organisation called the Piggy Palace Good Times Society, the function of which was listed as to organise, coordinate, manage and operate special events, functions, dances, shows and exhibitions on behalf of service organisations, sports organisations and other worthy groups. These charity events were, in fact, raves that the brothers held in their farm's slaughterhouse, which they'd converted into a warehouse-style space. Their parties were well known among the locals and often drew crowds of up to 2,000 people, among them bikers and local sex workers. He often hosted parties at an ad hoc nightclub called Piggy's Palace, which attracted the political and economic elites of the Lower Mainland, along with the Hells Angels. So picture this scene: high society types, politicians, bikers, and sex workers, all partying together in a converted slaughterhouse on a pig farm. If that sounds like the setup for a horror movie, well, you're not wrong. But for now, it was just an eccentric rich farmer throwing weird parties. What's the harm in that, right? Meanwhile, in Vancouver's downtown east side, women were disappearing. Between 1978 and 2001, at least 65 women disappeared from Vancouver's downtown east side. The majority of the missing women were Indigenous women, women with substance use disorders, and sex workers. These weren't exactly the type of disappearances that made headline news. They were marginalized women, people society had largely written off. And here's where the story takes a turn from merely weird to genuinely sinister. Starting in the 1990s, women living in the Lower Mainland, most notably on the impoverished downtown east side of Vancouver, had started to go missing, leading to speculation in the media that a serial killer was operating. But Robert Pickton, despite his bizarre behaviour and creepy farm, wasn't on anyone's radar as a suspect. He was just the odd pig farmer who threw wild parties. Worker Bill Hiscox called the farm a creepy-looking place, patrolled by a 612-pound boar, and described Pickton as a pretty quiet guy, hard to strike up a conversation with, whose occasional bizarre behaviour, despite no evidence of substance abuse, would draw attention. Wait, hold on. A 612-pound boar patrolling the farm? Most people use guard dogs. Pickton used a massive, potentially deadly pig. If that doesn't scream, stay away from this place, I don't know what does. Here's where the story gets particularly infuriating, because this could have all been prevented much earlier. On March 23rd, 1997, Pickton was charged with the attempted murder of Wendy Lynn Eistetter. During an altercation at the farm, Pickton had handcuffed one of Eistetter's hands and stabbed her repeatedly with a knife. Eistetter managed to escape and report him. Think about that for a moment. A woman literally fought for her life, escaped from a handcuff situation after being stabbed, and made it to safety to report her attacker. This should have been case closed, end of story. But no, it gets stranger than that. The inquiry has heard she was handcuffed on one hand and fought off Pickton, running naked to the road and flagging down a car. She died while under care but was revived, only to have her testimony dismissed. Pickton was released on $2,000 Canadian bond, and the attempted murder charge against him was stayed on January 27, 1998, because Eistetter had drug addiction issues and prosecutors believed her too unstable for her testimony to help secure a conviction. So let me get this straight. A woman survives attempted murder, literally dies, and gets resurrected. And the justice system says, well, she's a drug addict, so we can't trust her testimony. Meanwhile, Pickton walks free with nothing more than a $2,000 bond. After the 1997 incident, farm worker Bill Hiscox started noticing something very disturbing. In the next 3 years after Pickton's run-in with the law, Hiscox noticed that women who visited the farm tended to go missing. Eventually, he reported this to the police. But did the police immediately investigate? Of course not. An employee of Pickton found several purses belonging to the missing women from the downtown east side and reported Pickton to the police. The police conducted 3 searches of the farm but found no evidence. Wait, it gets even more absurd. In June 1999, the police received a tip that Pickton had a freezer full of human flesh in his farmhouse, which the police ignored. Though a warrant was secured, no search was carried out. Let me repeat that. The police received a tip about human flesh in freezers and decided not to follow up on it, while women continued to disappear from the exact demographic that Pickton's previous victim belonged to. This is either the most spectacular case of police incompetence in history or willful negligence on a criminal scale. Meanwhile, Pickton was getting sloppy in other ways. They even trailed him to the meat rendering plant where he allegedly disposed of the bodies, but they never stopped him to check what he had in his truck. Robert Byers, the plant's foreman, testified that he saw Pickton drop off between 5 and 10 loads at the plant, but that he didn't see exactly what he was dumping. So the police were literally following a suspected serial killer to a meat rendering plant, a place where you could dispose of organic matter, and never thought to check what he was dropping off. At this point, you have to wonder if the police were actively trying not to solve this case. In February 2002, Canadian police raided Robert Pickton's property on a warrant. At the time, they were looking for illegal firearms. Instead, they found items belonging to multiple missing women. Both Pickton brothers were arrested, and police obtained a second warrant using what they had seen on the property to search the farm as part of the BC Missing Women investigation. So after years of ignoring tips, dismissing victims, and following a suspect to body disposal sites without investigating, the police finally stumbled onto Canada's worst serial killer by accident while looking for guns. It's almost comedic if it weren't so tragic. What they found on the farm defied belief. There, they found body parts and bones littered across the property, many of which were in the pigsties and belonged to Indigenous women. The remains, or DNA, of 33 women were found on the farm. Now, we need to talk about what actually happened to these women, and I warn you, this gets very dark very quickly. According to a witness on tape, Pickton had claimed that he brought his victims, who were prostitutes, to the farm, handcuffed them, had his way with them, killed them by strangling them, bled and gutted them, ran them through a wood chipper, and then fed their remains to his pigs. But that's not even the most disturbing part. Another claim is that the victims were ground, the resulting mince mixed with the pork mince from the farm, and the packages given to Pickton's friends and family. Health officials once issued a tainted meat advisory to neighbours who might have bought pork from Pickton's farm, concerned the meat might have contained human remains. Think about that for a moment. People in the community may have unknowingly consumed human remains mixed with pork. This wasn't just murder, this was a level of depravity that borders on the supernatural. He allegedly handcuffed and stabbed other victims, including one woman who managed to escape, naked and bleeding, in 1997 after stabbing Pickton with his own knife. Oh wait, we already knew about that one. The woman whose testimony was deemed unreliable because of her drug addiction. Here's where Pickton's ego ultimately contributed to his downfall. Pickton once bragged to an undercover police officer that he killed a total of 49 women, but that number wasn't quite right for his liking.
I was gonna do one more, Make it an even 50. That's why I was sloppy. I wanted one more. Make the big 5-0.
Robert Pickton sat in a Vancouver, BC jail cell and lamented that his quest to kill 50 women had come up just short.
I made my own grave by being sloppy. Doesn't that just kick you in the ass now?
Pickton told his cellmate, adding that authorities were planning on charging him with murdering 49 women.
I was just gonna do one more. Make it even.
His cellmate, by the way, was an undercover police officer recording everything. So not only was Pickton a serial killer, he was also apparently terrible at spotting undercover cops. His vanity about reaching a nice round number of murders is perhaps one of the most chilling examples of how disconnected from reality he had become. The investigation into Robert Pickton became the largest serial killer investigation in Canadian history, costing nearly $70 million and involving extensive forensic work. Forensic analysis proved difficult because the bodies may have been left to decompose or be eaten by insects and pigs on the farm. During the early days of the excavations, forensic anthropologists brought in heavy equipment, including two 50-foot flat conveyor belts and soil sifters, to find traces of human remains. Imagine being the forensic anthropologist who had to sift through pig excrement and farm soil looking for traces of human DNA. This investigation wasn't just about finding evidence, it was about piecing together the scattered remains of at least 26, and possibly 49, human beings who had been fed to pigs and scattered across a 15-acre farm. Pickton's trial began on January 30th, 2006, in New Westminster. Pickton pleaded not guilty to the 27 charges of first-degree murder. Despite the mountain of evidence, DNA from victims, recorded confessions, and witness testimony, the verdict was surprisingly limited. On December 9, 2007, Pickton was convicted of second-degree murder in the deaths of 6 women, only 6 convictions out of potentially 49 murders. Although he was initially charged with 26 counts of first-degree murder, he was convicted of only 6 counts of second-degree murder. 20 other charges were later stayed. The reasoning? The evidence for the other cases was either too degraded or incomplete to secure convictions. When you feed people to pigs and put them through wood chippers, it turns out that providing definitive proof becomes quite challenging. But this story isn't just about one depraved individual. It's about a systematic failure that allowed him to operate for years. The Vancouver Police Department later admitted that there were mistakes made and we could have caught Pickton earlier. The Canadian Encyclopedia's coverage of the Pickton case details how this tragedy exposed deep-rooted issues of systemic racism, classism, and sexism in law enforcement. Pickton specifically targeted women from Vancouver's downtown east side, an area plagued by poverty, addiction, and sex work. Many of his victims were Indigenous women, a demographic that has historically received less attention from both law enforcement and media. This wasn't just police incompetence. This was a demonstration of how society values different lives differently. When marginalized women started disappearing, the response was minimal. When a wealthy pig farmer was accused of attempted murder, he was released on a $2,000 bond. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed to protect some people while abandoning others. Canadian serial killer Robert Pickton, who took female victims to his pig farm during a crime spree near Vancouver in the late 1990s and early 2000s, has died after being assaulted in prison. Authorities said Friday he was 74. The Correctional Service of Canada said in statement that Pickton, an inmate of Port Cartier Institution in the province of Quebec, died in hospital following injuries sustained in the May 19th assault involving another inmate. Cynthia Cardinal, whose sister Georgina Papin was murdered by Pickton, said she was overwhelmed with happiness when she received a text message Monday with the news that he had been attacked. She called it karma. And so ends the story of Robert Pickton, a man who turned a pig farm into a house of horrors and exposed just how little society valued the lives of marginalized women. He died in prison in 2024, attacked by another inmate, leaving behind a legacy of unimaginable horror and systematic failure. The most horrifying aspect of this entire case isn't the individual depravity of Robert Pickton, though that was certainly horrific enough. It's the realization that this could have been stopped in 1997 if a drug-addicted sex worker's testimony had been deemed credible. It could have been stopped in 1999 if police had followed up on tips about human flesh in freezers. It could have been stopped at any number of points if the authorities had treated the disappearances of marginalized women with the same urgency they would have shown for missing university students or suburban mothers. Robert Pickton didn't elude capture through criminal genius. He eluded capture because society had already decided his victims weren't worth looking for. 65 women disappeared from Vancouver's downtown east side over more than 2 decades. When police finally searched the pig farm in 2002, they found evidence of at least 33 victims. Pickton claimed he killed 49. The truth is, we'll never know the exact number because when you feed people to pigs, count on the evidence disappearing along with the victims. This case stands as one of the most chilling examples of how prejudice, negligence, and systemic failure can create the perfect conditions for a monster to thrive. Robert Pickton wasn't just a serial killer. He was a symptom of a society that had already written off his victims long before he killed them. And perhaps most disturbingly of all, similar conditions exist in communities around the world today. The question isn't whether another Robert Pickton could emerge. It's whether we'd recognize him before it was too late. Thanks for watching.